welcome to absolutely everybody around the world on behalf of Foundation Ipsen. And this is a tremendous pleasure and honor for those of us working in rare disease. Dr. Urv is a leader. She's a heroic advocate for patients and an innovator. Dr. Urv is the program director for the Rare Diseases Clinical Research Network, a multidisciplinary international program in the Office of Rare Diseases Research at NIH. Prior to coming to NIH, Dr. Urv worked with children experiencing a variety of intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. Her research career, extensive, focused on the behavioral aspects of aging and Alzheimer's disease in adults with Down syndrome and developmental disabilities. It is a tremendous privilege and pleasure to invite Dr. Urv to step onto the UCSF international stage. Her opening address is Rare Disease Therapeutics, Soup to Nuts. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. And as you pointed out that this is an international group that's listening, I will share a funny anecdote that I just had earlier when I was speaking to a colleague who's from New Zealand who said, "Tina, what is soup to nuts?" And that is just an American phrase for the beginning of the meal. You start with soup and you have all the courses, and the last thing that they give you is nuts. So what I'm going to cover today is a lot about rare disease from the beginning of the process of getting diagnosed to getting a treatment. So thank you very much. So imagine an illness that affects 30 million Americans. That's as many people as there are in the US that have diabetes. That's more than have cancer or HIV or Alzheimer's. And actually, it's more than have cancer, HIV, and Alzheimer's added together. We're talking about rare diseases. There are 30 million people in the US with one of 7,000 diseases. That's 1 in 10 Americans. So if you know 10 people, one of these people is likely to have a rare disease. Half of the rare diseases, half of the 30 million people are children, and most rare diseases are serious, life-threatening, and 95% have no treatment or cure. Becoming an individual with a diagnosis of rare disease is an ordeal in and of itself. Doctors are often taught, when you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras. The rare disease patients think of themselves as zebras and want people to be thinking zebra. The National Organization of Rare Disorders, NORD, reports that about 1 in 13 people are currently living with an undiagnosed condition, and it usually takes 5 years or longer for someone with a suspected rare disease to receive a correct diagnosis, with the patient visiting numerous physicians along the way. The diagnostic odyssey is very real, and it's prolonged, and it results oftentimes in irreversible complications of the disorder. It is difficult to find a rare disease patient within a healthcare system, since the majority of rare diseases lack specific diagnostic code. Incidence and prevalence rates for many rare diseases is just often a guessing game. The direct medical costs of rare diseases are very high. It's been reported to be 3 to 5 times higher than in individuals without rare disease. So I was part of an HHS project with my colleague Ann Pariser. We interviewed various people who worked in the field that were in some way involved with rare disease treatment development. And I'm speaking of a wide variety of people. So if you look at these people listed, we talked to people at FDA, parents, patients, advocates. We talked to investors and economists and entrepreneurs, hospital administrators, payers. And we interviewed these people, and what we found was that they all wanted the same thing. They all wanted people with rare diseases to have a treatment, but they all had their own priorities, they had their own responsibilities, and they had their obligations to other people. And what we found was it was like they were speaking a different language, but they all wanted the same thing, and we found that to be very important. So what we did was we got the impressions from these various people, and we mapped out where the challenges that were described, and we had a little bit of fun doing this. You'll see some dragons out in the water and some cliffs that are very scary, but people talked about silos. They talked about data silos. They talked about disease silos. But it was very much more complicated than just silos. It was more like all these different groups were on islands unto themselves. They described great work that were happening on the islands, but they didn't talk about communication and transit between the islands themselves, which we found to be a major problem. Interestingly, when they described a positive situation, it almost always related to strong communication and collaboration across an island. For example, we spoke to a colleague, an academic individual who was developing a treatment, but they had no experience working with industry. And they said how they got that drug into an IND enabling situation was they found a colleague who had worked in industry in the past who could give them advice as to what to have in place before they even approach the FDA. So how is this rare disease world different than the world where drugs are developed for common diseases? The major difference is that for common diseases, the bridges and the majority of the infrastructure have largely been built. The people doing the common disease development are mainly large pharma companies and have well-established routes and know how to navigate. Whereas the rare disease world, we're often the trailblazers. So if this map seems a little familiar, it's very similar to this translational science medallion, as I call it, that comes from the from NCATS, where I work, where you really look at the basic science, the preclinical science, the clinical research, clinical implementation, and public health. And what's important are these lines in between are just as important as the individual circles themselves. So what is it that we need to do? We need to start developing bridges. We need to establish routes of communication that are regular, and we need translators, especially across over to the regulatory realm. What was interesting when I was working with Anne had spent 16 years working at the FDA, whereas I had spent at that time about 12 years working at the NIH. And I kept saying, well, the challenges are on the left side of the map. And Anne kept saying, no, it's the right side. It's the regulatory side. That's where all the challenges are. So everyone has a different vision, but what we all need to do is come together. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges we face in rare disease. One current estimate is it takes 10 to 15 years to get a drug to market. It can cost $2.6 billion to develop a drug from initial discovery to completion, and less than 12% of drugs are approved once they've entered development. And the issue is things move too slowly, it's too expensive, and we're just not ready for the trials sometimes. So what do we need to do? We need to work faster, we need to work in a more cost-effective manner, and we need to produce high-quality data. And data was one thing that we heard from most of the people that we talked to, is that the quality of the data that people develop in going into a clinical trial is not high quality, or is not developed in a manner that's easy for other people to reuse. So instead of just giving you the hard parts of things, I will give some suggestions as well. So another issue, another challenge is risk. And we need to lessen the risk of drug development. And so remember, only 5% of rare diseases have FDA-approved treatments. And how can we be ready for that? We need to be prepared. And one of the focuses we have in the Office of Rare Disease Research right now is clinical trial readiness. And what do we mean by that? It's understanding who we're going to treat, who's the most appropriate patient to have in a trial, when is the best time to treat that patient, where are the experts and where are the patients, so if we do set up a trial, it can run effectively. What is the best potential treatment, and what is the desired outcome, and why is this the way to go forward? Show us the data, we need to know. And how should the trial be conducted? Some of the strategies we have for moving faster are having established networks with clinical researchers and patient advocacy groups in place, and natural history studies that have outcome measures. So when it's time to go to a clinical trial, you have the outcome measure you need. You have a biomarker and you have common data elements that can be used. So it's not that you're scrambling at the time a treatment is being developed to develop these other tools. They should be developed in parallel to developing potential drugs. So what we have at NCATS is the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network. It was established by the Rare Disease Act of 2002. And by the end of this current cycle, we'll have 20 years of funding, and we will have supported over 33 different consortia studying a variety of rare diseases. And I'll make these slides available in case anybody wants to see the list. Right now, we have 20 different consortia, and they are funded by 10 different NIH institutes. We have 166 patient advocacy groups working with the consortia. Each consortia needs to study 3 or more disorders, and that's something that I can't emphasize enough. We don't have the time or the money to go one disease at a time. It's important to try to find ways to look for commonalities, to work on multiple disorders together. You have to have multiple sites. They have 3 or more clinical trials. They have a career enhancement core. They work collaboratively with our data management and coordinating center, and they're fully integrated with the patient advocacy groups. And so what we're trying to do is turn many consortia into a research community. So the patient advocacy groups who work with us are learning and sharing across rare diseases from each other, because many of the issues and challenges we face are the same. It doesn't matter what rare disease you're looking at. It's hard to recruit patients. It's hard for the families to find treatment. So work on those commonalities together is something we recommend. We really emphasize data standards and clinical trial readiness. So the sites what we have right now, we currently have 358 active sites, 197 are unique, and we're co-located with the NCATS CTSA program. We're in a variety of countries, and when I say we have a difference in number of active sites and unique sites, my best example is University of California, San Francisco, where we have 5 of our consortia have sites. And Dr. Jennifer Puck and Dr. Helen Kim have led these wonderful consortia that have had great findings and are really leaders in the network. We also have 3 consortia that have clinical sites that are here that are also gathering their data from this site. So hats off to your faculty here. So let's look at some of the strategies we have for working in a cheaper or more cost-effective manner. And what we look at a lot is economies of scale, having shared work environments, shared tools, or innovative models for trials like basket trials and umbrella trials. What we're doing in the RDCRN right now is we have all of the different 20 consortia have their data in the RDCRN's operational environment. And what we're doing is we're providing a variety of tools that are necessary across the different research consortia, such as Ombra or Box, REDCap, Twilio, and NCATS provides all of the licenses. So each individual consortia doesn't have to buy individual licenses. The licenses and the ability to use these tools are all in a single environment. And it's more cost effective to get licenses for software in such a manner, and they can share data and a variety of things. We're also going to have a same type of model for the RDCRN data repository, which will be where the data will be shared, because it's very important for the rare disease data to be available to the community. Other models that we have right now are the Paved GT program, which is an NCATS-led platform vector gene therapy program. It's a pilot project that seeks works to increase the efficiency in clinical trial startup by using the same gene delivery system and manufacturing methods for multiple rare disease gene therapies. So again, you're looking at multiple disorders at a time. Paved GT will make program results and regulatory documents publicly available with the intention of benefiting future gene therapy and clinical trials for very rare diseases. And again, it's multiple diseases at a time, and that sharing that is very important. Another project that is happening right now is a Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium. And this is part of the Accelerating Medicines Partnership Program. And it's a public-private partnership between the National Institutes of Health, the US FDA, and multiple public and private organizations. And it's managed through the Foundation for the NIH, which is FNIH. This program aims to improve our understanding of therapeutically relevant biological pathways and validate information that could be relevant for the development of multiple therapeutics. It aims to develop platforms and standards that will speed the development and delivery of customized or bespoke gene therapies that could treat millions of people affected by rare disease. And this was launched in October 2021. So that's a very exciting initiative. Some strategies. So I can't emphasize data standards and scientific rigor enough. That is really where the focus is. And as many of you know, the NIH is establishing new NIH data sharing and data management policy. So it's important to remember the management part of it. So the NIH expects that data be made widely and freely available as possible while safeguarding the privacy and participants and protecting confidential and proprietary data. So this is new starting in 2023, actually. I think I might have pulled up the wrong data. So the data sharing into NIH is having the FAIR principles, which is the data needs to be findable, accessible, and reusable. And so those are the things that we've been focusing on a lot. I'm sorry about the wrong slide here. And I thank you for your time, and I'm open for any questions you may have.
Absolutely huge thank you. That was a fantastic, I'm just switching on my video, absolutely wonderful talk. We actually have sort of a whole load of questions coming in. So I apologize to those who've sent them if we don't get to your question, but let me start without any ceremony getting to these. I think they're actually sort of quite interesting and relevant. Oh my goodness. We will not be able to get to all the questions. Okay, so the first question in no particular
James, if you want to send them to me also, if we don't get to them all, I'll answer them and send them to you, and you can.
I mean, I think the first thing, again, by the way, is people, myself included, would absolutely love if you're comfortable sharing your slide deck. I think I was quite mesmerized. So if you're comfortable with that, that would be fantastic. But let me get
absolutely, to the I'll fix that last slide. 2003. It's like, no, it's supposed to be 2023.
Well, none of us would have commented, Tina. So thank you for pointing that out. So okay, so let me jump right in here.
All right.
So the first question is, I think, is probably on the tip of many people's tongues, is how directly integrated with the FDA are you in this incredible transdisciplinary program? Are they listening, or are they receptors?
They are very much listening, and actually into the chat box later, I'll put what we are having is on May 16th and 17th. We have a meeting that was co-planned by the FDA and NCAT's Office of Rare Disease, specifically for academic investigators and the challenges they face and how they're different. And a lot of the questions that we have and they're presenting are ones that, I share. I listen in on 20 consortia calls a month, and I listen to what the challenges and what problems people are having. And we have regular calls with, at least several times a month, we have calls with the FDA partners in their rare disease area, and we share back and forth what the challenges are. And they're very interested in hearing, what the challenges the academic investigators are having, or what they don't understand, or what they need that extra help with. So what we're trying to do with them is develop some of those bridges that we talked about related to communication. So there's regular communication between us.
I mean, actually, along the theme of bridges, let me come straight to the next question then, because I find this absolutely fascinating and important. How close, the question is really, how close is the NIH to listening to the voices of real patients and their problems?
I would like to think we have hundreds. I can speak from my experience. So in the Office of Rare Disease, we are often on calls with patient advocacy group. If somebody calls us, we talk to them. If they write to us, we write back. We talk to them. But for the RDCRN, how that consortium or how that network is set up, when I say that the patient advocacy groups are part of the network, they don't just write a letter when you write the grant and send it in and say, yes, I support this. I think it's a great idea. They have their own steering committee. They have representatives who sit in on the principal investigator steering committee. We have lots of work groups, and there's representation from the patient advocacy groups on every group that we have working. So we're, they're partners. They're part of it. We don't see them as any different than anyone else. So I think that might be a little bit different than how it's been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds absolutely fantastic. I've got my own burning questions on this, but I'm not going to. Let me say, I don't want to get through as many of these as I can. Several questions speak to geography, and I'm going to bunch these together. The first one, which I personally think is also very important, is if rare diseases are so common, for example, in the United States and Europe, there must be a quote unquote huge pool of undiagnosed patients across Africa. Part A is what, obviously this isn't within the scope of NIH per se, but where are you in terms of advancing diagnostics in Africa? And B is, how are new therapies going to be integrated in those patients so identified?
I think there should be opportunities for everyone. I think one of the challenges in some countries, I used to work in the area of newborn screening quite a bit, so I'll take my example from that if you have a country where people are dying from a lot of infectious diseases, that's going to be that country's primary concern and their greatest worry, and their biggest effort is going to save lives in that way. It can be challenging to test a child for a rare disease, say, for example, PKU. It's not just testing and identifying the individual, but you want them to get the treatment. You want that equity of, yes, you're diagnosed, but everyone should have that fair chance to treatment. And it's also a challenge in the US as well. And you might be identified as having a rare disease, but does everyone really have the same chance at the same treatment that everyone else has? So I think that's an international problem. I think it's a bigger issue in other countries, but it's an issue, and I think everyone's doing what they can.
So your answer is superb, and again, just because we're so limited on time, I had a very similar question about Mexico, because I think your map showed very little activity there. But may I please assume, just for time, that you have a similar answer in that with respect to Mexico, unless there are specific programs?
I think that the map I showed right now showed groups that were related to our consortium. Our consortium are very open to partnering with people around the world. And if there are doctors, physicians, rare disease groups that are interested in partnering, they can reach out to our consortium and become part of this network, in a sense.
So quickly, on the same theme, and then we come to something else. there is, and this is wearing my European hat, there is tremendous relationship between your organizations and the European Union and organizations like Eurodis, Rare Disease International, and so on. Would you perhaps please speak to that, just to educate this international audience?
I do not sit on those panels, but I know that there's a huge representation from the NIH that participate. One of the groups I worked on at NIH is the Undiagnosed Disease Network, and I've participated in the Undiagnosed Disease International meetings and group activities. But there's large representation of the US, almost to the point that people are like, oh, there are too many people from the NIH already, we don't need any more. But a lot of back and forth, a lot of committee work, a lot of discussions of how to have data standards, how to share data, how to have information flow freely back and forth. So
thank you so much for that. And now to really the issue that we're seeing the greatest traffic on, namely underserved communities. I'm sure you can inform all of us much more than the person sending me this question, but along the lines of how do we approach the poverty gap in the United States, first of all? Second of all, how do we address issues in underserved communities? Is there equal engagement in clinical trials in the Native American community, which I think is a particularly interesting question.
Right.
And I've got another question on clinical trials right in front of me, but let's start there. Speak to, please, I know unlimited efforts you put into underserved communities in the United States, and then into the different communities in the United States, such as Native American community, the Latino community, and so on. Thank you.
One thing I will hop on really quickly is the Native American community. Please. And Jennifer Puck, who's at UCSF, has worked extensively with the Navajo Nation with primary immune deficiencies. So she is a wealth of information on how she approached and how she worked with the community. I think the same is to be said for other communities within the Native American group. I think that there is a huge effort going on right now, well, across the country, across the NIH and across our consortium, the network that I'm in, of how can we reach out, how can we have better equity, and of not just participating in a trial, but getting your treatment, getting your medication. One of the challenges is always that the clinical trials are at big university hospitals. You know, it's great if you live in Boston or San Francisco or New York City, you have those opportunities to get that expertise. But how can we build roads and bridges to allow that expertise to move to other parts of the country? And I think the Undiagnosed Disease Network was a program that started and has been trying to do that. I think that the NCATS has the Center for CTSA program, the Center for Translational Science Awards program, where each of these centers has to have a community outreach program. And I think there just needs to be more effort and more energy put into those areas. But also, you can't tell a group of people to come and be part of your science. Come be part of our science. What we're doing is good for you. You have to build relationships. You have to develop trust. You know, who's going to put their kid into a clinical trial if you don't trust the people who are doing it to understand and respect your culture and your community? So there's a lot of building that needs to be going on, a good foundation, which is more social than it is scientific. But if you don't do that, you're never going to be able to build the science on top of it. And that's my personal opinion. So.
I mean, it links directly to another question we had about access to diagnosis, quote unquote. A problem we see, I don't know what this is, it's in the United States, a problem we see is the issue of patients going to doctors who will not conduct DNA sequencing testing. If you conduct the test, you have to provide the treatment. Health insurance packages don't necessarily cover this, and so on. Could you talk to some of those barriers to diagnosis in this space?
I think you're going to have Stephen Kingsmore talking in a little while, and Stephen can speak to that really well. Part of it is, I think we need to get everyone onto the same page, in that the science is moving forward. The cost for whole genome sequencing is becoming less. It should become more of the norm rather than a special test. I think that's where, like, I had that whole long list of different people that you need to talk to.
Agreed.
You can't have just the doctors say this is how it should be, and the payers just saying no. You have to have everybody at a table and bringing up, this is what we need and this is why we need it. And then the other group saying, well, we would love to do this, except this is how it will impact payers, or this is how it will impact the hospital, or this is how it's going to impact this other part of the translational process that gets the medication to where it needs to the patients. But if you just have the patients and the doctors talking, it's not going to happen. You need to get all the players around the table together, working together to implement change.
Speaking about getting the players around tables, one of the most frequent, again, a lot of people have basically the same question, which is, when are we going to build the international data sharing services that includes phenotype, genotype, and also sociological characteristics relevant to treatment? So in other words, can you foresee a true international integration of the relevant data, the phenotypic data, and therefore ultimately therapeutic options?
We had a meeting last June, about gene-targeted therapies, equity, and early delivery of these treatments. And we had experts from various different areas come together. And every working group we had, the recommendation they had at the end of the day was, we need a centralized data place because this is the most important aspect of it. And I think this is something that people need to continue calling for. So I don't know that the NIH is going to just build it and say, oh, here you go, this is what we need. You need people from both sides of the pond and, from different hemispheres than we're in, to come together and agree upon different ways of working together. And I think that's it's almost a social part of it is a challenge. People think it's a great idea, but making it happen and bringing the right players together is what the challenge is. And the data doesn't all have to sit in one place. The data just needs to be interoperable. You need to have it in good shape. And that's one of the reasons we really are emphasizing good quality data and metadata and data standards and common data elements and such, so you can bring together what you need to bring together.
Well, if there's ever a great way to end a great talk, that was it, a grand challenge to all of us. So a massive thank you on behalf of the entire rare disease community and all of us watching you today. A massive thank you. And on that note, more power to you, first of all. And second of all, now I'll hand over to Charles. Thank you again.
Thank you.